الرحمن الرحيم طاسين ميم تلك آيات الكتاب المبين نتلو عليك من نبأ موسى وفرعون بالحق لقوم يؤمنون إن فرعون علا في الأرض وجعل أهلها شيعا يستضعف طائفة منهم يذبه أبناءهم ويستحيي نساءهم إنه كان من المفسدين ونريد أن نمنع على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين ونمكن لهم في الأرض ونري الفرعون والهامان وجنودهما منهم ما كانوا يحذرون آمنت بالله وصدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم. كيف حالكم؟ Allah yazidukum. Allah Ta'ala says in His Quran, in Surah Al-Qasas, which is the 6th surah of the Quran, Allah Ta'ala talks about the society of Pharaoh, the Pharaonic society, and the principles upon which it is built. Allah Ta'ala says in His Quran, Ta Sin Mim, Tilka Ayatul Kitabul Mubin. Allah says these are signs or verses from a clear book. Natlu alayka min naba'i Musa wa Fir'auna bil haqqi liqauman yu'minun. Allah says we will relate to you some of the story of Moses and Pharaoh. We will relate to you these stories with truth to a people who believe. Allah says, Inna Pharaona ala fil ardi. Allah says, verily Pharaoh, he exalted in the earth. Pharaoh thought that his society was the best society. Pharaoh used to glorify in his society, and he used to say to the world that his society was the best society that ever existed. The Pharaonic society is no different from this society, which believes it's the best society which ever existed. It glorifies to the world that there's no society better than it. And Allah says in the Quran about them, He says, وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَاعًا. Allah says, and Pharaoh made his people into factions, which means, in modern day terms, the Pharaonic society separated its societies into firqa, divisions, the white against the black against the Hispanic, men against women, the old against the young, the Republicans against the Democrats, the conservatives against the liberals, the Crips against the Bloods, Norteños against the Sarteños, Mexican gangs against black gangs against Laos and Vietnamese gangs, a complete society which was divided against themselves, and this is a division that Pharaoh brought about in order, as the scholars say, that all of these groups would not agree about the corruption of Pharaoh. Then Allah Ta'ala said, وَيُسْتَضْعِفُوا طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. But then Pharaoh oppressed a group from amongst them. In other words, Pharaoh convinced the Republicans and the Democrats. Pharaoh, he convinced the right, the conservatives, as well as the liberals. Pharaoh convinced the upper class and the middle class, the whites and the blacks, that in order for them To survive, they have to subjugate a group from amongst them. They must oppress the group from amongst them. And how did Pharaoh oppress them? Allah Ta'ala says, يُذَبِّهُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُمْ. The way they oppress this group from amongst them is that they sacrifice their boys, and they let their women folk live. Pharaoh had created a society, a complete society, where everyone was divided, but all those divisions had agreed upon the subjecting of a group from amongst them. And how did they subject them? By sacrificing their boys. How did they sacrifice their boys? How were the boys sacrificed? When you sacrifice something, you dabbihu. When you sacrifice something, you do it for a better cause. Like, for example, if you and your wife want to get cable vision one week, you say, listen, baby, we're going to have to make some sacrifices so that we can get cable next month, right? When you want to send your children to college, right? You say, listen, honey, we're going to have to sacrifice so that we can send Bobby or Abdullah to college. So when you sacrifice something, you sacrifice for a better cause. So why did Pharaoh sacrifice these young boys? What was the cause to which Pharaoh was sacrificing, and what was the good cause that he was sacrificing these boys for? The word tadbih, sacrifice, also means to kill. As the Rasul ﷺ said, Ana ibnu dhabihain. I'm the son of the two sacrifice victims. Because his father Abdullahi was intended to be killed, and his great-grandfather Ishmael was intended to be killed, but Allah Ta'ala saved them from that sacrifice, from that killing. What happened is that the magicians of Pharaoh, like in the days of Pharaoh, Pharaoh had a TV program called 911. Pharaoh had another TV program called Police or Cops. And in those programs, Pharaoh's magicians told the people of Pharaoh that in order for their society to survive, they have to sacrifice these boys. These boys must be sacrificed for a higher cause. And what was that higher cause? The mayor of Pharaoh's town, in order for him to get elected, he had to tell you how many children, young boys, he was sacrificing. In order for the district attorney in Pharaoh's court to justify being re-elected to his position, he also had to show you how many young boys he was sacrificing. In order for the judge, that federal judge, or that district state judge in Pharaoh's society to justify getting his job, he had to also justify how many boys he was sacrificing. It created jobs for everybody. The police in Pharaoh's town, in order to justify getting more weapons, he had to tell the society how many boys had to be sacrificed. The defense attorney who was defending or pretending to defend these boys also had to guarantee their job because of the sacrificing of these boys. Now, when there were no longer men in the society, and the men were being sacrificed now, that created other jobs for social workers now. Social workers, they come in town and they talk to these young women who don't have men in their homes, and to tell them how to govern their homes and how to control their homes. Pharaoh had another system. He then hired psychiatrists now to come into the prison systems and analyze these young boys to determine whether these young boys were predators. To determine, now creating jobs now for psychiatrists. And also in Pharaoh's prison system, to justify sacrificing these boys now, they hired more officers now. They were downsizing in IBM back in Pharaoh's time. They were downsizing in Oracle back in Pharaoh's time, but they were hiring in the prison systems of Pharaoh's time. And in those prisons, they were creating jobs. Even doctors and researchers now were getting better jobs and more finances to determine how many of these here inmates were getting AIDS and how often were AIDS destroying them, and hepatitis and tuberculosis and other diseases that exist within the prison systems of the Pharaonic society. Yudhabbihu, Allah says that Pharaoh was sacrificing these boys for a higher cause. It was creating jobs throughout the Pharaonic society, and this society is no different from the Pharaonic society. It's the same system. It's the same game, but it has another name. Then it was called Pharaoh. Now it's called America. Then it was the Pharaonic dream of building pyramids. Now it's the American dream. Sacrificing young men for the American dream. How did they sacrifice these men? In order to sacrifice someone, there has to be a reason to sacrifice them. I think back then, Pharaoh must have set these young boys up. Pharaoh, the magicians of Pharaoh told Pharaoh that if we didn't kill these boys here, that they're going to end, the sons of the tribe of Israel are going to end up destroying our society. So Pharaoh had to set up a system where these boys were sacrificed. Here we have a system in America where the American government can bring in, they can have satellite that can look down into the home of Saddam Hussein and tell you what he ate last night. They can tell you what type of underwear Saddam Hussein wore last night. They can tell you whether he slept in the first palace, the second palace, the third palace, or the seventh palace. They know everything about Saddam Hussein just from their satellites, yet those same satellites cannot tell you which ships are bringing cocaine into the country, into Miami, into Houston, Texas, into Mexico. They can't even look into those ships and tell you when the drugs are coming in. It's not that they don't know, they do know, but they have to have a reason for sacrificing these young boys. They have to justify it, and they have to set up these young boys. We know that the CIA and the government has a hand in bringing in drugs into these communities, setting up these young boys to be sacrificed. Allah Ta'ala says in his Quran, Yudhabbihu abnaihim, and they sacrifice their boys. And you notice Allah Ta'ala referred to the boys as boys, and he didn't call them men. Why did Allah call them abnaihim, and then when he referred to the women, he called them women? He said, Yudhabbihu abnaihim, by sacrificing their boys, will yustahi nisaihim, and letting their women folk live. Why did Allah refer to the boys? Because Pharaoh set up a system where the men could not become men. The men themselves, what is a man? A man is a person who controls his own community. A man is a person who controls the economy of his own community. A man is a person who provides jobs for his women, who protects his children from predators. A man is a person who protects his own community. But these young African American men, these young Hispanic men were never allowed to become men, nor do they want to be men. They never want to allow these men to receive the rights of self-determination to control their own communities. So they set them up before they become men. They give them drugs. They set them up. The police come in with the drugs, give the drugs to certain individuals, certain collaborators among our own people, among the Hispanics, who then give these drugs to young boys at the age of 12, at the age of 8, at the age of 11. Makes it more attractive now to sell drugs than it is to work at McDonald's, because you can make, well, you used to could make $5,000, $1,000 in a daytime selling crack cocaine. Now it's different. You can't make as much drugs, can't make as much money as you used to. But this is how they set up these young boys. And when these boys make their money, they don't know. It's like, for example, what El Hajj Malik Shabazz said. You think you're a thief and you think you're a wise street person. You don't know you were set up by a big thief. A big thief set you up. He gave you the drugs. He tell you how much drugs to sell. You sell the drugs, and then he's watching you. He watches you as you buy that nice home for your mother. He watches you as you buy that nice Lexus for your mother. He watches you as you give your girlfriend a new dress and a new TV. He watches as you buy the second house and the third house, and he's steady watching you, counting your money. And sometimes he winks at you, and he'll ask you to set up one of your young unlings where you set him up to get arrested so you can look good and the police can look good. And just when you made just enough money, they'll arrest you, they'll take your home, they'll take your mama's home, your sister's home, your daughter's new dress. They'll take everything that you can't justify that you earned with a 9-to-5 job, and next thing you knew, you're in prison, you're locked under, and you can't even tell nobody what happened to you, that you were set up. You can't even come out of prison now. You've been sacrificed, and you were set up by a big thief, you think you're a drug dealer, the big drug dealer set you up. He brought the drugs into the country and set you up. And you thought you were a big-time dealer with your gold chain and your gold rim car. You thought you were doing good. And next thing you know, that policeman, that old Jimmy policeman, he's now sold your car. Or he gave your car to his son where he can go to Stanford University. You done paid for a vacation now in the Caribbean for some policeman. You done paid for a vacation or a college education for some mayor in Florida or some governor here in Florida. You've been set up. You were sacrificed for a higher cause, to create jobs for people. These men were never allowed to become men. They were made boys, and they were killed in their infancy, and their life now is daily in the prisons of Florida and in Texas and Kentucky. And in California, our young men are filling up the prisons. And when they get in the prisons, they don't come out because they're creating jobs for people. Then Allah Ta'ala says, for yastahi nisa'ahum. And he let the women folk live. How did Pharaoh let the women folk live? The word istahi comes from the word hayya, which means to live. Like when someone says, hayya la salat, come to prayer. In other words, Pharaoh called the women of the oppressed closer to them and let the men stay out. You go to IBM, you find all the sisters and the Hispanic sisters working there, but you don't find no brothers there. You find it is easy for a sister to get a job, but a brother can't get a job. The best, most attractive job for him is a job in the underground where he can make swift money. They'll give a sister some welfare, but the brother won't get welfare. They call the women close. They let the women folk live. Also, they give the women an apparent position in society, and they give the men a lowly position in society. Like when you say in Arabic, إِذَا إِسْتَحْيَا لَكَ تَرِيكَ فَخُذْ يَمِينَكَ. When the road becomes clear to you, take to the right. So the word hayya also has the meaning of becoming apparent, that which is clear. So the women are given apparent positions, and the men are given a low position. They let the women folk live, and that's how they divide the oppressed. Because Pharaoh, he said, وَجَعَلَ أَهْلِهَا شِيَاءً. He makes his people into factions, dividing the white against the black, the Mexican against the Cuban against the Haitian, the upper class against the lower class. All these groups divided amongst themselves, and then all of them are united against the lower class. And then the lower class, they divide them by killing their young men and letting their women folk live. And then Allah Ta'ala says in his Quran, إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Verily, Pharaoh was among the corrupt. He was among the corrupt because he created a system that corrupted the whole society, divided the whole society, had the whole society suspicious of one another, fighting one another, killing one another, and it was so corrupt that they themselves couldn't get out of the corruption, the cycle. Then Allah Ta'ala says, Allah brings good news to those who oppress. Allah says, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ أَسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Allah Ta'ala desires, and the strange thing about this verse, the amazing thing about this verse, that in the beginning of the verse, Allah was talking in the past tense. Then all of a sudden Allah begins to use the present tense verb as to say that the Pharaonic system, not only is it a system of the past long ago, but the Pharaonic system is a system today. And Allah Ta'ala says, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ أَسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Allah, he desires to namuna, to favor those who are oppressed in the earth. That means Pharaoh has a plan for these young boys, but Allah, God, has another plan for them. He wants to sacrifice them and create jobs for the mayor of Florida, the governor of Florida, the mayor of this town, The police, they have a job. The police going to get paid whenever they bust one of these young brothers. All that money that they make goes straight to the police. And the police sometimes don't even tell you what they took. They'll tell you on TV that we captured $5,000 when they actually took $1 million. And that goes right into their home out in the suburbs of this here town here. They make money off of true niggas, as they say on the sign here, and county boys. They make money off of them. You know what I'm saying? They make their livelihood off of them by sacrificing them. But Allah Ta'ala said He has a plan for them. Allah desires to favor them. And Allah says in His Quran, وَنَجْعَلُهُمْ أَئِمَةً, and to make them imams or leaders. And the scholars of Quran have said, أَئِمَةً fil wilaya wal أَئِمَةً fi deen, to make them leaders in government and to make them leaders in religion. That means Allah Ta'ala is going to take these young men who the world has written off as being predators and being criminals. Allah is going to make them men of Allah. Allah is going to make them men who love Allah and who love the next life. Allah is going to make them men who have fear of Allah and who don't fear the system. Allah Ta'ala is going to make them men who used to sell drugs, but now they're going to come to the best tijara, as Allah Ta'ala says. Shall I tell you what the best commerce is? It is belief in Allah and His messenger and struggling in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the best business that Allah Ta'ala talks about. Allah says He will make them also, He says, وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ, and to make them inheritors of this earth. To make them inheritors in the very place that they will sacrifice. To make them control their communities and govern their own communities. Allah then says, وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and to establish them in the earth. One of the brothers was telling me about the jobless. We're talking, the jobless are not like people who are unemployed. There's a difference between those who are unemployed in the system and getting unemployment checks and the jobless. The jobless are those who are not even in the system. The only way they can work is under the system. They got to work under the basement of the system in order to survive. In order to make a living for their family, they got to sell contraband. They got to do things that's illegal. Those are the jobless. They're not even in the system. Allah Ta'ala says, وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and Allah will establish them in the earth, to give them gainful employment, to give them an established way of earning a living for themselves and building up their families and cleaning up their communities and building up their communities and running these here devils out of their communities. This is what Allah's plan is. And then Allah said, and I will close out, He said, وَنُورِيَ الْفَرَوْنَ وَحَمَانَ وَجُنُودُهُمَا مِنْهُمْ مَا كَانَ يَحْذِرُونَ. And He said, and Allah says, and we will show Pharaoh and Haman. Who was Haman? Haman was the social engineer of Pharaoh. Haman was the person who, when Pharaoh said, listen, I don't believe in this God of Moses. I don't believe in him. Haman, won't you build me a tower so I can go see this God of Moses, see if he's telling the truth. So who is Haman? Haman is the social engineers of this society. Haman is your daily news reporter, the one who tells you, who shows you images of your young boys on the street being sacrificed. Haman is these men on TV. Haman is the social engineers and the psychiatrists and the engineers and the politicians who tells you that, hey, we must crack down on these young boys. We must stop these young boys. Allah says that we're going to show Pharaoh and Haman and the social engineers and the collaborators from among them. Because yes, in order for Pharaoh to do to the people what they're doing, there must be some collaborators from among the oppressed who help Pharaoh doing that. Jesse Jackson and all these other step and fetch it, Uncle Tom, Negroes and Hispanics who sell our people out to our enemies. Allah is going to show them and the social engineers and the oppressed exactly what they feared most. And what was the thing that they feared? What is it that Pharaoh feared? Pharaoh feared that these young men would become men themselves and they would control their society. They would no longer be governed by the society that oppressed them. They would be independent and only depend upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the thing that they feared, and Allah has guaranteed in His Quran and His heavenly books, from the earliest books until the last book, the Quran, that this would happen. That Allah ta'ala is going to give them governance. And it's not like the first time, because in this area here, at one time, this area here was an independent land before Stonewall Jackson took it from the Indians and the Africans. At one time, the Indians and the Africans controlled this land. This was an independent land run by Indians and Africans before Stonewall Jackson was able to take this place from the Indians and the Africans. And one day Allah Ta'ala will give the religion of Islam to these people, will change their morals, change their moral fiber, wake them up, stand them up, and clean them up, and establish them in the earth as Allah Ta'ala has promised. Assalamu alaikum.